My name is Eleanor Martinez, and I'm 28 years old. I've always been the responsible older sister, the one who takes care of family events and makes sure everything runs smoothly. For months, I'd been planning my brother's 30th birthday party, coordinating every single detail to make it perfect. But I never expected that the people who raised me would humiliate me in front of 60 guests calling me their family maid. What they didn't know was that I had kept every receipt, every contract, every proof of payment for that elaborate celebration they were taking credit for. Before I share what happened that night, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe how this family drama unfolded, and the moment I revealed the truth changed everything forever. Growing up as the eldest of 3 children in the Martinez family meant I became the caretaker early on. My parents, Helen and Robert Martinez, had immigrated from Mexico and worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. They always prioritized my younger brother Marcus, who was now turning 30 and had become a successful architect. My youngest sister Patricia was 25, recently married, and lived across the country, rarely making it home for family gatherings. The family dynamic was crystal clear from childhood. Marcus was the golden child, the one whose education and dreams always came first. When money was tight, they sacrificed to pay for his college applications, his architectural program, his professional development courses. Meanwhile, I put myself through college working nights and weekends to pay tuition. By the time I graduated and landed a position as a financial advisor in downtown Chicago, I was already earning more than both my parents combined. But success never translated into recognition in the Martinez household. My 6-figure salary, my downtown condo, my financial achievements were always overshadowed by Marcus's latest architectural project or career milestone. When neighbors asked about their children, my parents would spend 20 minutes describing Marcus's work designing office buildings and luxury homes, then briefly mention that I worked with numbers somewhere in the city. The irony was impossible to ignore. Marcus made excellent money as an architect, but he spent it just as quickly. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, luxury vacations, the latest gadgets. He was perpetually broke between paychecks while I had built substantial savings and owned property. Yet our parents constantly praised Marcus to relatives and family friends, treating me like the family helper whose job was to manage practical matters while they focused on their successful son. This dynamic became even more pronounced when I started discreetly helping with their bills. The mortgage payment that came up short one month, the unexpected medical expenses, the property tax bill they couldn't cover. I'd quietly transfer money or pay directly, never asking for acknowledgement, just wanting to help my family. They'd accept the assistance without comment, then continue telling everyone how well they were managing on their own while Marcus pursued his important career. 3 months ago, everything escalated when my parents announced they wanted to throw Marcus an elaborate 30th birthday celebration. This wasn't going to be cake and pizza in their backyard. Mother Helen had visions of an elegant party that would impress all our relatives and Marcus's professional colleagues. She spent weeks describing her plans for this milestone celebration that would showcase what wonderful, successful parents they were. The problem became obvious within days. An elegant party for 60 guests required a budget they simply didn't have. The costs for venue rental, catering, entertainment, decorations, and professional photography would run well into the thousands. I watched my parents struggle with the mathematics, trying to figure out how to create their dream celebration on their limited income. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I approached them quietly, offering to help with some of the costs for Marcus's party. In reality, I was prepared to fund the entire celebration, but I phrased it carefully to preserve their pride. They accepted immediately, relief visible on their faces, and began planning with renewed enthusiasm. What I didn't anticipate was how completely they would take credit for everything that followed. Once my parents knew the budget constraints were solved, they threw themselves into planning mode with infectious excitement. Mother Helen spent hours browsing venues online, finally falling in love with an elegant banquet hall at a downtown hotel that cost $2,800 for the evening. She described it as perfect for showcasing Marcus's success, with its crystal chandeliers and panoramic city views. The catering came next. Helen researched several companies before selecting an upscale service that specialized in contemporary American cuisine. Their package for 60 guests, including appetizers, plated dinner, and dessert service, totaled $3,200. She insisted on premium options because Marcus deserves the finest quality for his milestone birthday. For drinks, they arranged professional bar service at $1,800, featuring premium liquors, craft cocktails, and an extensive wine selection. Helen explained to anyone who would listen that they wanted Marcus's colleagues to see how much the family valued celebrating his achievements properly. Entertainment required a live jazz band that cost $2,400 for the evening. Helen had specifically requested musicians who could provide sophisticated background music during dinner and dancing music afterward. She wanted the atmosphere to reflect Marcus's refined taste and professional status. Professional photography added another $1,200 to capture every moment of the celebration. The floral arrangements designed around Marcus's architectural interests with geometric patterns and modern styling cost $1,600. Custom decorations incorporating blueprints and building designs added another $800. Every single payment came from my accounts. Every contract bore my signature. Every vendor communication came through my phone and email. The total reached nearly $15,000, but I handled each expense gladly, hoping this generous gesture would finally earn my parents' recognition and appreciation. Instead, something unexpected happened. The more money I spent on Marcus's party, the more my parents took complete credit for the planning and execution. When relatives called to ask about party details, Helen would spend lengthy conversations describing our vision and what we decided to do for Marcus. She never mentioned my financial contribution or involvement in vendor coordination. Father Robert began telling neighbors about the significant investment he and Helen were making in Marcus's celebration. He'd describe researching venues, selecting caterers, and arranging entertainment as if he'd personally handled every detail. The pride in his voice was unmistakable as he painted himself as the generous father creating a memorable milestone celebration. During family dinners, they'd discuss party plans while treating me like a silent partner whose job was managing logistics. When I'd mention vendor communications or timing concerns, they'd acknowledge the information briefly before returning to discussions about how impressed guests would be with their thoughtful planning and generous spending. I kept meticulous records of every expense initially for tax purposes and personal organization. But as the weeks progressed and my parents' credit-taking intensified, I found myself preserving documentation more carefully. Something felt wrong about being completely erased from a celebration I was entirely funding. The guest list included 60 people, extended family members, Marcus's college friends, professional colleagues, and longtime family friends. My parents personally called each invitee describing the elaborate party they had planned and paid for to celebrate their successful son's milestone. They accepted congratulations graciously, basking in praise for their generosity and thoughtfulness. 3 weeks before the party, I realized I had created an impossible situation. I was funding a celebration where my parents would receive all the credit while I remained invisible. But I was already committed financially and emotionally. The party would happen, the guests would attend, and I would smile quietly while my parents accepted praise for my $15,000 investment in Marcus's birthday. What I couldn't predict was how much worse the situation would become on the actual day of the party. The morning of Marcus's birthday party, I arrived at the hotel venue 2 hours early to coordinate final setup details. The banquet hall looked exactly as I had envisioned: elegant lighting, beautiful floral arrangements, perfectly arranged tables with crisp linens and gleaming silverware. The jazz band was conducting sound checks while catering staff prepared the kitchen for evening service. Every vendor recognized me immediately as the client who had signed contracts and paid invoices. The event coordinator addressed me directly, confirming timeline details and last-minute adjustments. The florist asked for my approval on arrangement placement. The photographer reviewed shot lists we'd discussed during our planning meeting. For those 2 hours, I felt like the respected organizer of an important celebration. That feeling evaporated the moment my parents arrived. Mother Helen swept into the banquet hall wearing her best dress, immediately began directing staff and making suggestions about table arrangements. Father Robert followed close behind, inspecting decorations and commenting approvingly on the venue selection. Within minutes, they had established themselves as the hosts in charge of the celebration. The first guests began arriving at 6 o'clock for cocktail hour. Extended family members and family friends approached my parents with warm congratulations about the incredible party and generous celebration. Aunt Rosemary gushed about the elegant venue choice. Uncle Fernando praised the sophisticated floral arrangements. Cousin Maria complimented the live jazz music, adding perfect ambiance. My parents accepted every compliment, graciously describing their vision for Marcus's milestone celebration and their commitment to doing something really special for our successful son. They moved through the cocktail crowd like proud hosts, sharing stories about the planning process and their excitement about surprising Marcus with such an elaborate party. Meanwhile, I worked behind the scenes, ensuring smooth service and managing any issues that arose. When the bartender ran low on premium whiskey, I coordinated with hotel staff to restock supplies. When elderly relatives needed assistance finding restrooms, I guided them personally. When the photographer had questions about family group shots, I helped organize logistics. The first real slight came during cocktail hour when guests began asking me about specific party details. Before I could respond to questions about catering choices or venue selection, my parents would interrupt, smoothly explaining their decision-making process and creative vision. It happened repeatedly. A guest would turn to me with curiosity about some aspect of the celebration, and my parents would redirect the conversation to their planning efforts and generous investment. Aunt Rosemary made a particularly painful comment while admiring my dress, saying how nice I looked for someone who's been working so hard on party details. Before I could respond, Mother Helen quickly interjected that she and Robert had handled all the important planning while I just helped with small organizational tasks. The pattern continued throughout cocktail hour. Relatives and family friends praised my parents' generosity and thoughtfulness, while I remained essentially invisible despite being responsible for every detail they were admiring. I began to feel heat rising in my cheeks, but I pushed down my frustration and continued ensuring the party ran smoothly. The real problem started when I noticed the catering staff had forgotten to prepare special dietary plates for Marcus's girlfriend, who has celiac disease. This was something I had specifically discussed and paid extra for during our planning meetings. I quickly approached the catering manager, who apologized profusely, and immediately arranged for gluten-free alternatives to be prepared in the kitchen. Mother Helen witnessed this entire interaction. Instead of thanking me for catching and resolving the issue, she made a loud comment to nearby guests about me always fussing around like the hired help. Several relatives overheard, and a few chuckled at what they apparently considered an amusing observation about my helpful nature. The comment stung, but I told myself she didn't mean it maliciously. I continued managing vendor questions and ensuring guest comfort, trying to focus on making Marcus's celebration successful, rather than dwelling on feeling unappreciated. Then Uncle Fernando jokingly asked if I was the professional party coordinator, after watching me resolve a question with the photographer about family portrait arrangements. His tone was friendly and complimentary, acknowledging the skill with which I was managing complex logistics. Father Robert's response changed everything. He laughed loudly and declared, "No, that's just Eleanor playing Maid like always. Someone has to keep things organized while the real family enjoys the party." Multiple relatives overheard this comment. Some laughed uncomfortably, not sure how to respond to what seemed like a harsh joke about family dynamics. Others looked genuinely surprised by the dismissive tone. I felt my hands begin trembling slightly, heat flooding my face as the humiliation settled in. For the next hour, I moved through the party in a strange emotional fog. I continued ensuring everything ran perfectly because that's what I'd always done. But inside, I was processing the devastating realization that my parents viewed me as hired help rather than family. 28 years of being the responsible daughter, years of financial support and emotional caretaking, and they saw me as the maid. Marcus remained completely oblivious to any tension, enjoying the celebration surrounded by friends and professional colleagues. He moved through the party accepting congratulations about the elaborate celebration his parents had organized, never once acknowledging that I might have contributed anything beyond helping out with details. As we moved from cocktail hour into dinner service, I realized the worst was yet to come. Dinner service began at 7:30, with guests taking their assigned seats throughout the elegant banquet hall. The catering staff moved efficiently, serving the premium meal my parents had selected and I had paid for. The jazz band provided perfect background music while conversation flowed among the 60 guests celebrating Marcus's milestone birthday. I found myself seated at a side table near the kitchen entrance, having been excluded from the family table. To make room for Marcus's important colleagues from the architectural firm. My parents. Marcus, his girlfriend, and several of his professional contacts occupied the central table where they could be seen and heard by the entire room. The meal proceeded beautifully. Guests complimented the sophisticated menu choices, the excellent wine selection, and the overall elegant atmosphere. My parents beamed with pride, accepting praise for their wonderful taste and generous investment in creating such a memorable celebration. As dinner plates were cleared and dessert service began, Father Robert stood up with his wine glass, preparing to give the traditional birthday toast. The room gradually quieted as guests turned their attention toward the family table. I watched from my side table, having been relegated to observer status at a party I had entirely funded. Robert's speech began warmly praising Marcus's professional achievements and personal character. He described his pride in watching his son become a successful architect, build meaningful relationships, and reach the milestone of his 30th birthday. The speech continued for several minutes, highlighting Marcus's accomplishments and bright future prospects. Then came the devastating turn that shattered my heart completely. Robert raised his glass higher and declared, "We worked so hard to create this perfect evening for Marcus. Helen and I saved for months, planned every detail, because that's what loving parents do for their successful children." The room erupted in appreciative applause. Guests nodded approvingly at such generous parental love and financial sacrifice. Several relatives called out congratulations to my parents for their dedication and thoughtfulness. Marcus stood to hug both parents, thanking them publicly for their incredible generosity and creative vision. As the applause began to die down, Mother Helen rose from her chair with wine glass in hand, clearly intending to add her own comments to the toast. What she said next destroyed any remaining illusion I had about my place in this family. Helen smiled broadly at the assembled guests and announced, "Though I must say we couldn't have managed without our little Eleanor scurrying around like the family maid, making sure everything runs smoothly. She's always been so good at taking care of the details while we handle the important things." 60 guests erupted in laughter. The comment struck many as endearingly funny, the kind of affectionate family teasing that happens at celebrations. Some relatives who knew our family dynamics looked uncomfortable, but the majority found Helen's observation amusing and charming. Marcus raised his glass toward me with a patronizing smile, calling out across the room, "Thanks for all your help, sis. You're the best assistant a guy could ask for." More laughter filled the banquet hall. More humiliation crashed over me like a tidal wave. But the cruelest blow came from Mrs. Patterson, a longtime family friend who had known me since childhood. She stood up, slightly wine glass raised, and proclaimed loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "How wonderful that Eleanor found her calling as the family helper. Not everyone can be successful like Marcus, but service is important too." The laughter grew louder. Guests began applauding not just for Marcus, but for the amusing family dynamic that cast me as the helpful sister who had found her proper role supporting her more successful brother. Several people turned to smile at me indulgently, as if I were a beloved family pet who had performed a particularly clever trick. I sat frozen in my chair, 28 years of accumulated pain and frustration crystallizing into a single moment of absolute clarity. Every financial sacrifice I had made, every achievement I had earned, every time I had quietly supported this family while they celebrated Marcus, all of it led to this moment where I was publicly diminished as the family maid at a party I had entirely funded. The heat in my face had nothing to do with embarrassment anymore. It was pure righteous anger building toward an eruption that would change everything between us forever. My hand moved slowly toward my purse, where my phone contained photographic evidence of every single receipt, every contract, every payment that had created this generous celebration my parents were accepting praise for. As the laughter continued and guests returned to their dessert and conversation, I made a decision that would expose the truth and shift the power dynamic in this family permanently. The decision crystallized in an instant of perfect clarity. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, which contained photographs of every receipt, every contract, every payment confirmation that had created this elaborate celebration. My hands were steady now, no longer trembling with humiliation, but focused with purpose. I stood slowly from my side table and walked deliberately toward the front of the banquet hall, where the jazz band had set up their equipment. Guests were still chuckling over my parents' amusing comments about their helpful maid daughter, but a few relatives noticed my movement across the room. The band leader, who recognized me as the client who had hired them, looked up as I approached their microphone setup. I asked quietly if I could borrow the microphone for a moment to make an announcement. He nodded immediately, pausing the background music and handing me the wireless mic with professional courtesy. The room gradually quieted as guests noticed the music had stopped and someone new was standing at the microphone. My parents looked confused but not concerned, probably assuming I wanted to add some tribute to Marcus's celebration or thank them publicly for organizing such a wonderful party. I tested the microphone briefly, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system to every corner of the banquet hall. 60 pairs of eyes turned toward me expectantly. The silence was complete except for the soft clink of dessert forks being set down on plates. My voice was steady and calm when I began speaking. I'd like to share something important with everyone here tonight. My parents just thanked you all for helping celebrate this expensive, elaborate party they worked so hard to plan and pay for. I paused, looking directly at my parents, who were beginning to sense that something unexpected was about to happen. Helen's smile became uncertain. Robert's expression shifted from confusion toward apprehension. I think there might be some confusion about who actually made this evening possible. I continued, raising my phone so everyone could see it clearly. Let me clear that up right now. I had prepared for this moment by organizing the receipt photos in chronological order from venue booking through final payment confirmations. The banquet hall's projection screen, originally set up to display a slideshow of Marcus's photos throughout the years, was still connected and ready for use. Within seconds, I had connected my phone to the projection system. The first image appeared on the large screen, the venue rental contract for the elegant banquet hall showing my name as the client and my credit card information for the $2,800 payment. The room remained silent, but I could sense the shift in energy as guests began processing what they were seeing. Several people reached for their own phones, apparently preparing to photograph the evidence I was displaying. The catering contract came next, signed by Eleanor Martinez, and paid from my account for $3,200. Then the bar service agreement with my signature and payment information for $1,800. The jazz band contract followed, showing my name as the client, and $2,400 charged to my credit card. Each document appeared on screen for several seconds, giving guests time to read the details and understand the implications. The professional photography agreement, the floral arrangement invoices, the custom decoration costs, every single expense that had created this generous celebration, my parents had taken complete credit for. By the time I reached the final receipts, the mathematical total was clearly approaching $15,000. Every contract bore my name. Every payment came from my accounts. Every vendor relationship had been established and managed by me personally. The silence in the room had become profound. I could see guests exchanging glances, whispering urgently to their table companions' phones coming out to photograph the projection screen. My parents' faces had gone completely white. Marcus had stopped mid-bite of his birthday cake fork, suspended in air as he stared at the undeniable evidence. This was my moment. 28 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as less important than Marcus had led to this instant, where I finally had the power to tell the complete truth about our family dynamic. So when my mother calls me the family maid for making sure everything runs smoothly tonight, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent banquet hall, she's actually describing the person who paid for every single detail of this celebration. The maid who spent nearly $15,000 to honor my brother's birthday. The impact was immediate and devastating. Several guests gasped audibly. Others began talking urgently among themselves. I could see relatives calculating the financial implications, understanding suddenly that everything they had praised my parents for had actually been funded entirely by the daughter they had just witnessed being publicly humiliated. But I wasn't finished. The most important part of my revelation was still to come. The maid who took vacation days from work to coordinate vendors, I continued, who spent weekends planning every detail of this celebration, who handled every logistical challenge to ensure this evening would be perfect for Marcus. All while allowing my parents to take complete credit because I hoped it might finally earn their respect and appreciation. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. Instead of being the amusing family helper who had found her proper supporting role, I had revealed myself as the generous family member whose contribution had been not only unacknowledged, but openly mocked. The aftermath of this revelation was about to change everything between us forever. The silence following my revelation lasted only seconds before the room erupted into chaos. Guests began talking urgently among themselves, the sound of 60 shocked conversations filling the banquet hall. Some people stood from their tables to get better views of the projection screen, which still displayed the final receipt totaling my $15,000 investment. My parents' desperate attempt at damage control began immediately. Mother Helen jumped to her feet, her face flushed with embarrassment and panic. "Everyone, please, this is just a family misunderstanding," she announced loudly, trying to regain control of the situation. We always intended to reimburse Eleanor for her help with the costs. This was always a family effort, but her explanation fell flat in light of the evidence everyone had just witnessed. The contracts clearly showed me as the sole client. The receipts proved I had paid every expense, and most damaging of all, guests had just heard her mock me as the family maid for ensuring the party ran smoothly. Father Robert attempted a different approach, trying to redirect attention back to the celebration's original purpose. "Let's not let this distract from what's important tonight," he said, raising his wine glass again. "We're here to celebrate Marcus's achievements and milestone birthday." His effort to minimize the situation only made things worse. Uncle Fernando, who had witnessed the earlier exchange about me being a maid, stood up from his table with obvious anger. "Robert, this is disgraceful behavior toward your own daughter. Eleanor has done something incredibly generous, and you've treated her terribly in front of all of us." Aunt Rosemary immediately joined in, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Helen, I am disgusted by what I just witnessed. Eleanor organized this beautiful party, and you humiliated her publicly after she spent $15,000 celebrating Marcus." Other family members began voicing their opinions, most supporting me and criticizing my parents' behavior. Cousin Maria announced she was appalled by the treatment I had received. Aunt Patricia called the situation completely unacceptable and demanded my parents apologize immediately. Marcus found himself in completely unfamiliar territory. As the golden child who had always been the center of positive attention being upstaged at his own birthday party, by revelations about family financial dynamics left him visibly uncomfortable. His initial attempt to diffuse the situation with humor backfired spectacularly. "Well, Eleanor always did like to show off with money," he said with a forced laugh, apparently trying to minimize the significance of my $15,000 contribution. The comment landed with a thud in the hostile atmosphere, making him appear ungrateful and dismissive, rather than charmingly self-deprecating. Several guests who had been taking photos of the receipt evidence began sharing them immediately on social media. I could see phones throughout the room capturing not just the financial documentation, but the family confrontation that was unfolding in real time. My parents realized they needed to speak with me privately before the situation deteriorated further. Helen approached me as I was disconnecting my phone from the projection system, her expression mixing embarrassment with anger. "Eleanor, we need to talk right now, privately." They pulled me into a small conference room adjacent to the banquet hall, closing the door behind us to muffle the sound of ongoing conversations among the guests. The private confrontation that followed revealed the true depth of their selfishness and lack of genuine remorse. "You have ruined Marcus's special day," Helen accused immediately, her voice shaking with fury. "How could you embarrass us like this in front of everyone? This was supposed to be about celebrating your brother, and you made it all about yourself and your money." Father Robert's response was even more revealing. "This was vindictive and attention-seeking behavior, Eleanor. You could have discussed this with us privately instead of humiliating us publicly. You've damaged our relationships with the entire extended family." Neither parent expressed any regret for mocking me publicly or taking credit for my financial contribution. Neither acknowledged the years of financial support I had provided or the emotional toll of being treated as less important than Marcus. Their only concern was their own embarrassment and the damage to their reputation. This was my opportunity to finally address years of accumulated grievances. I had their complete attention for the first time in decades, and I was going to use it effectively. I began with specific examples they couldn't deny or dismiss. The car repair loan 2 years ago that they had never acknowledged or repaid. Mother Helen's medical bills that I had covered quietly when their insurance fell short. The property tax shortfall I had handled last year, so they wouldn't lose their house. Years of financial support provided without recognition, while they praised Marcus constantly for achievements that required no sacrifice from him. "I have spent years trying to earn your love and respect through service and financial support." I explained, my voice steady, despite the emotional weight of finally confronting this dynamic. "Instead of appreciating my contributions, you've treated me as less important than Marcus, whose only advantage is being male and charming, rather than responsible and financially stable." The ultimatum I delivered was non-negotiable. I was finished enabling their disrespectful behavior and unequal treatment. No more financial assistance without acknowledgement. No more accepting being treated as the family helper whose job was supporting Marcus's success. No more tolerating being mocked or dismissed while contributing more to family welfare than anyone else. "You can continue favoring Marcus if you choose," I concluded, "but you'll do it without my money subsidizing your lifestyle or my emotional labor maintaining family relationships." The confrontation revealed that my parents were more concerned about losing my financial support than repairing our emotional relationship, which told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. Meanwhile, the party in the banquet hall was winding down early as guests processed what they had witnessed, and many decided to leave rather than continue celebrating under such awkward circumstances. Marcus attempted to salvage his birthday celebration, but the damage was irreversible. When he approached me privately as the evening ended, Marcus seemed to grasp for the first time how much I had been contributing financially and emotionally to our family, while receiving no recognition or appreciation. His attempted apology was too little too late, but it suggested that the golden child was finally beginning to understand the cost of his privileged position. The immediate consequences extended beyond just that evening. Several relatives exchanged contact information with me, expressing their desire to maintain relationships separate from my parents' influence. They had witnessed my generosity and their treatment of me, and wanted to ensure I knew I had family support independent of the toxic dynamic I had endured for so many years. By the end of the evening, the power structure in our family had shifted permanently. The weeks following Marcus's birthday party, were simultaneously the most difficult and most liberating period of my adult life. I had finally spoken truth to power within my family, but the emotional aftermath required careful processing and significant life adjustments. Initially, I blocked my parents' phone calls completely. After 28 years of feeling invisible and unappreciated, I needed space to work through the accumulated emotional damage without their attempts to minimize or manipulate the situation. The silence was necessary for my mental health, even though it felt strange after years of being constantly available for their needs and crises. I started therapy within a week of the party, recognizing that I needed professional guidance to establish healthy boundaries and understand how I had allowed myself to be treated so poorly for so many years. My therapist helped me see patterns I had been blind to: the way I had sought validation through financial support, the way I had accepted crumbs of appreciation while giving generously, the way I had enabled their favoritism by subsidizing their ability to focus exclusively on Marcus. The extended family relationships that had shifted during the party continued evolving in positive directions. Aunt Rosemary called me personally to apologize for not recognizing the family dynamic sooner and to express her admiration for how I had handled the revelation. Uncle Fernando invited me to family gatherings that my parents wouldn't be attending, ensuring I could maintain connections without subjecting myself to continued disrespectful treatment. Most surprisingly, several of Marcus's professional colleagues reached out to me directly. They had been impressed not only by the elegant party I had funded and organized, but by my calm, dignified handling of a humiliating situation. 2 architectural firms in the city offered me freelance opportunities managing their corporate events, recognizing skills they had witnessed firsthand. My parents' attempted reconciliation began after 2 weeks, but only when they realized I was serious about cutting off financial support. Their first approach was through Aunt Rosemary, asking her to help Eleanor understand that families have disagreements but need to stay together. When that failed, they tried calling my office, which I found presumptuous and inappropriate. Their eventual direct apology revealed exactly what I had expected: more concern about practical consequences than genuine remorse for emotional damage. Helen's voicemail focused on how much they missed having me involved in family decisions and how they hoped we could work things out. Robert's email emphasized that families should forgive each other and move past misunderstandings. Neither parent acknowledged the specific ways they had hurt me. Neither took responsibility for years of dismissive treatment or unequal family dynamics. Neither expressed genuine appreciation for my financial contributions or emotional support. Their apology was entirely self-serving, focused on restoring access to my resources rather than repairing our relationship. When I finally agreed to meet them for coffee 6 weeks after the party, I came prepared with clear, non-negotiable boundaries. Any future relationship would require equal treatment and genuine appreciation. No more financial assistance without acknowledgement and gratitude. No more tolerating dismissive comments or comparisons to Marcus. No more accepting being treated as the family helper whose contributions were expected rather than valued. Marcus's journey toward understanding proved more complicated, but ultimately more genuine. The golden child had been forced to examine his privileged position within the family for the first time in his life. He began taking financial responsibility for some of our parents' needs, discovering how expensive and emotionally draining it could be to constantly bail them out of financial difficulties. His apology, when it finally came, demonstrated real growth and self-reflection. He acknowledged that he had been oblivious to my sacrifices and contributions, that he had benefited from unequal treatment without questioning or challenging it, and that he owed me years of gratitude for supporting the family while he pursued his career without additional responsibilities. Our relationship began improving slowly as Marcus proved his changed attitude through actions rather than just words. He started including me in family conversations as an equal rather than a helper. He began acknowledging my professional success in conversations with mutual friends. Most importantly, he stopped accepting unequal treatment from our parents and started defending me when they slipped back into old patterns. The The professional confidence boost from standing up to my family translated directly into workplace improvements. Within 6 months of the party, I received a significant promotion at my financial advisory firm. I had started speaking up more assertively in meetings, stopped allowing colleagues to take credit for my work, and began advocating for myself with the same energy I had previously reserved for helping others. My personal relationships improved as well. I started dating again, something I had neglected while focusing on family caretaking responsibilities. I developed friendships with people who appreciated my contributions and treated me as an equal. I learned to recognize and avoid relationship patterns that resembled the family dynamic I had finally escaped. The deeper lesson I learned was that I had been seeking validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of seeing my value clearly. No amount of service financial support or emotional caretaking would ever earn their respect if they were determined to view me as less important than Marcus. My worth was not dependent on their acknowledgement, and their inability to appreciate me reflected their limitations rather than my inadequacy. True family relationships should be built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Love shouldn't require you to diminish yourself to make others feel more important. The most powerful moment of my life was not publicly revealing those receipts, but privately deciding that I deserved better treatment than I had been accepting. I found peace in building authentic relationships with people who valued my contributions without me having to prove my worth constantly. The extended family members who rallied around me after witnessing my parents' behavior became closer than ever. New friendships developed with people who appreciated my generosity without taking advantage of it. Today, my relationship with my parents exists on my terms with clear boundaries and mutual respect. Marcus and I have rebuilt our sibling bond based on equality, rather than the golden child dynamic that had damaged it for years. Most importantly, I learned that self-respect must come from within rather than from external validation. The question I want to leave you with is this: what relationships in your own life might benefit from healthier boundaries and more genuine appreciation? Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stop enabling others to treat us poorly. Have you ever been in a situation where family members took credit for your contributions or treated you unfairly? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who's struggling with similar family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message about self-worth and healthy boundaries. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and finding your inner strength. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve relationships built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is demand to be treated with the dignity you've always deserved.